Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Becca Choate, and I serve as Associate for Global Advocacy and Education with Global Ministries of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ and the United Church of Christ. Welcome to Wednesdays with the World, a United Church of Christ webinar series. This series highlights the ways in which the quest for justice is intersectional and global, providing opportunities for increased awareness of global concerns and highlighting opportunities for advocacy and action. Today's webinar is called Celebrating 100 Years with Back Bay Mission, Making Good Trouble on the Coast of Mississippi. And I'd now like to introduce the Reverend Elena Larssen, the UCC's Minister for Volunteer Engagement, who will introduce our speakers and moderate this conversation. Elena.
Thank you, Becca, and thank you, Brandy, our Cleveland-based staff, my colleagues in the church house. Good afternoon and good morning. We have folks all the way from Hawaii, all the way out here to the east coast of the mainland. So I just welcome you all today. My name is Elena Larssen. I serve as the Minister for Volunteer Engagement. And what that means is that I'm the latest lucky person who gets to run the volunteer ministries of the United Church of Christ. Those ministries were founded in 1955 in Schenkel, Pennsylvania. And the whole model of volunteer ministries was a praxis model of bringing people together to prepare, sending people out to serve, and supporting them to reflect, because service is a way to act out our faith in the world. So I am really grateful today to be able to be part of a year-long celebration for Back Bay Mission. The celebration is just beginning. This is not the only occasion, but we are so lucky to have James Pennington, Executive Director, and Sara Boone from the Back Bay Mission staff. They are going to answer some questions for us, and I have encouraged them to give lots of invitations about the ways that you can continue to celebrate and participate with Back Bay. First, I'll introduce Sara. Sara Boone's from Florida. She's been with Back Bay Mission 5 years. She holds a Master's of Arts in Criminal Justice, and she is currently working on her second Master's in Executive Leadership. And Sara, we are so glad that you're here today. Thank you, thank you. And James Pennington. Now, I have the privilege of having known James for a long time. He was serving a local church in Minneapolis when I was on the conference staff there. And since then, he and I have both been off serving in local churches, but he has an extensive ministry background, including campus ministry, advocacy, local church ministry, and his roots are in the Lutheran Church, but he has been UCC for more than 20 years at this point. So we are really grateful to have both of them today. Do you just want to unmute yourselves and say hello? I'm guessing you recognize some of the names. We have more than 50 participants because I know Back Bay Mission has so many friends and supporters.
That's great. Well, welcome y'all. We're so happy to have you here. Sara and I are just excited to really celebrate 100 years. I don't think it's quite sunk in yet. I've been here a year. And that was one of the things I think the board of directors said, hey, guess what? We're going to have a capital campaign. I'm like, wow. And the church I was at before in Phoenix was celebrating 100 years when I got there. So I seem to be into this 100-year thing.
Centennial celebration. That's right. You started in February of 2021 in the middle of the pandemic, relocating from Phoenix to Biloxi. Sara, tell us about your role at Back Bay Mission and as we get started here today.
So I run 2 programs. I do the outreach for the county, so bringing services to the individuals rather than them having to come to Back Bay Mission. And then I run a permanent supportive housing program where we house chronically homeless individuals with disabling conditions.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Oh, wow. We're gonna just start. We're going to start at the very beginning. And I've invited Sara and James to share lots of stories and anecdotes, but let's start at the beginning. For those who may not know, how was Back Bay Mission founded, and what role did the UCC family, knowing that the UCC was founded after Back Bay Mission, how is the UCC family interconnected with Back Bay Mission?
Well, that's fascinating. You know, I was down here on my sabbatical. I've been on 2 sabbaticals in Mississippi and Alabama. This is kind of my home state. As I was doing some research, I found Back Bay Mission because I didn't know about Back Bay Mission right at the time. And it kind of came out of First Evangelical Church, which was a precursor to the UCC back in 1922. And then there was a second congregation that was actually developed, and there were two other congregations that were called missions, or they were called chapels, here on the coast of Mississippi. So we had First Evangelical, precursor to UCC, became UCC in 1957 when the UCC was formed. And then they formed these other two missional chapels. And what I found fascinating about the beginning, which really has stuck with us all of these years, is the individuals in this church at First Evangelical and those who were doing outreach through the two chapels identified a class consciousness here on the coast of Mississippi, because the individuals that were coming to Mississippi to be a part of what at that time was probably the biggest fishing industry in the nation. This was kind of the queen, the king of the fishing industry. We're talking oysters, we're talking shrimp, we're talking, what do they call Biloxi bacon, which is a particular fish that is fantastic. And so people were coming from Yugoslavia and other Slavic countries, migrants, immigrants, right? And we know about when immigrants or migrants come to this country, they're often challenged financially. And so they said, hey, there's a class consciousness. These new migrants and immigrants aren't fitting in with any of the faith communities. So they established these two outreaches and sites where they actually felt they could worship, they could be a part of it. They had Sunday school because they realized there was definitely a class consciousness. They wanted to overcome that. And Bell Hooks herself says, right, it's not always about race, it's also about class. And so they formed these communities. And out of that, they started to meet the needs of the fisher folk that were migrating here. Like that was a time before, right, there were limits on how young a child could be to work. And so they were in the shrimping industry, the oyster industry. They didn't have shoes, they didn't have appropriate clothing. They didn't have Sunday school, they weren't in school. So Sunday school became not only Sunday school, but also education in general. And eventually, they also opened a food pantry in the 1940s, a craft shop, a clothing shop. All sorts of programs began to emerge. In the 1950s, St. Paul's Back Bay, which was one of the churches, right, that was one of those outposts, became St. Paul's Back Bay Church. Started a nursery, a daycare, a kindergarten. They started a teen town, they called it, which was a teen outreach, and they had over 600 youth involved. They actually started a credit union because the migrants and immigrants were finding it really difficult to find a bank, right? So they started a credit union for the migrants and the immigrants. And then 1957, of course, First Evangelical in St. Paul's became United Church of Christ. And so from there on out, it just kind of continued, right? They developed a community center with a library, preschool, daycare, kitchen, a community room. They started doing some organizing. They became a part of CHISM, which is the United Church of Christ Human Health and Services, right? They founded a Head Start. They helped to found Planned Parenthood in the 1960s, you know, go UCC, right? And that's when they actually started summer work camps to actually improve the housing of the elderly here on the coast, the folks that were living in a lot of poverty. And so I could share a lot more history, but that's kind of how the UCC roots really happened. And medical became really important. They actually hired a couple of physicians, a dentist, to continue to work with migrants. And now the migrant population kind of continues to flourish here, which is also individuals from Vietnam who came here also to be a part of the oyster and shrimping industry. And what's kind of interesting that I just found out is that in the 1970s, and Sara's program is funded by HUD, part of her funding is from HUD, that they were doing HUD supported neighborhood improvement in the 1970s, Back Bay was. They started a coffee shop called The Anchor at Keesler Air Force Base. It was kind of a collaborative between Back Bay Mission and the Protestant chaplains. But then the Protestant chaplains had to exit stage right because the Anchor Coffee Shop became the center for anti-war activity during Vietnam. So I was like, oh, it's so UCC right from the beginning, right? And then they gave birth to a women's center, a women's rights center, and advocacy center for women in the 70s. They gave birth to Coastal Family Health. And then in 1974, sadly enough, the UCC churches closed. And I will tell you why they closed in just a bit. So you can see if Becca wants to run some of these slides are kind of old pictures from Back Bay that I think folks will really, really relish in. That was in one of the churches, right, doing a baptism. And actually what you notice there, they're black and white folks together at a time when you couldn't have integrated churches. And they actually had integrated Sunday schools, which again, a bit later I'll talk about. That was the first pastor there. Looks like he's smoking a stogie or a cigar or pipe. Some of the kids they were working with back then. And again, notice this is interracial, which wasn't happening at the time. That's oyster industry. That's the shrimping industry. Those are some of the kids that were living in poverty they worked with. All these kids were shucking oysters and hold on there. So this kind of takes us to what I think is, for me, one of my really exciting points in history. Sarah, do you have anything to add before I continue to ramble?
What's just really interesting as we're walking through it, you still see the same issues today. We just respond to them in a different way. We're still seeing the classism and the racism all in East Biloxi, a lot centered around the same culture that's, I mean, the same industry is still struggling with the same things today in East Biloxi.
Yeah, it's kind of the folks that are working in the shrimping and the oyster industries making a living wage, right?
Yeah.
The same issues.
Yeah, we see a lot of them here. A lot of poverty still in East Biloxi. So it's really interesting to look back at this and see, although we've come so far, how much work is still left to do.
Oh, yeah, so much work.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the beautiful thing about Back Bay is actually how nimble Back Bay has been, how we've responded to the needs, the most current needs, right, of individuals. We're adaptable. And I find the same in the staff now. We only have 17 staff, but everybody's really adaptable. For those 100 years, I kind of looked and they kept adding programs and identifying needs and kept moving forward, right, without really thinking about it. But which takes us to one of my really, one of the most important parts probably in the history for me is the 1960s. And so if you want to kind of roll those next few, the Biloxi Beach Wade-In. So fascinating time here on the coast, desegregating the beaches as we were doing all this work of desegregation, right? You can stop there. So this is on the side of a mural that was just painted. We were there for the celebration of this huge mural that's on the side of a historic Black cafe in downtown Biloxi. And actually the one white face there that you can see is actually the executive director from Back Bay who participated in the wade-in to desegregate the beaches. And that was the last one in 1963. The executive director, other staff, and a few volunteers participated because they were standing in solidarity with the folks, with the Black folks in the community that were desegregating. One of those Biloxi Beach wade-ins was actually bloody. This was the last one, which actually did indeed change the dynamics, but it wasn't really till 1965 that the beaches were actually declared desegregated, which is fascinating. And so what happened is Back Bay Mission got very involved then with the NAACP, with the National NAACP, Mississippi NAACP. We hosted meetings on Back Bay Mission property, which meant there were some attacks. There were actually stones and rocks thrown through windows. And finally, there was a cross that was burned. And of course, there was very little police support because Back Bay Mission was seen as one of the not-for-profits and probably the only not-for-profit that was really partnering with the NAACP to end segregation here on the coast. So for me, it's those really bold, amazing folks that we stand on their shoulders. We stand on the shoulders of all the people that have done this work with the migrants, helping to desegregate the beaches, which to me is just amazing, fascinating work. And I think what's also interesting in actually 1999, 2000, They actually sat down together, the Back Bay Mission staff and the board of directors, and they talked about, here's going to be our 3 areas of work moving forward until we need to take a detour, right? Until something presents itself. And the first, what they would become a center for community ministry. Second, it would become a place for workers and volunteers, work camp, to your point, Elena. And third, we would have homeless and housing initiatives here for the coast of Mississippi. Those were the 3 core values, core areas of work, which today are still very, very much a part of Back Bay Mission. And Back Bay Mission gave birth to Loaves and Fishes, to a preschool, to the South Mississippi AIDS Task Force in the 1980s, when most people were saying, that's a punishment from God. You know, Back Bay Mission was saying, nope, we're going to take care of these folks that are living with HIV and AIDS. So for me, this in many ways kind of brings together much of the work that I've done in the world in this one place here on the coast in Biloxi, Mississippi, that has such a rich, beautiful, beautiful history. So, yes,
Wow,
older than the
James.
United Church of Christ. Yeah.
That's amazing. That is an amazing history. And you know, I think the thread I hear is there's this willingness to respond. You know, that's a
Oh,
phrase.
yeah.
That's a phrase we use a lot. I'm on the Global Hope team with the Disaster Response Minister and the Migration and Refugee Minister, and like, who's willing to respond is like the question that guides the humanitarian responses of the UCC, because those are the folks we partner with. And here's Back Bay with this 100-year history of being willing to respond and continually support progress. You know, and I think too, when you're in a place with an industry that attracts newcomers to our country, I served a church in a port city, and there is a dynamic there that you have waves and waves of new arrivals and new neighbors coming into the country, and that makes an incredibly diverse place. But people do often come coming from hard circumstances and needing community support. So here's a question. How did you all end up in that glorious history of responding to human needs out of a faithful place? How did you end up being the only UCC imprint in the state of Mississippi? Because that's the case, right? You're the only UCC entity.
Yeah.
Right. We have a small church up in Jackson, Mississippi, which is about 4.5, 5 hours north, which I have yet to travel to from the coast, but it's called Safe Harbor. They meet in an Episcopal church in the evenings. So that's a relatively new start. Given there were 3 churches and then 2 churches that were UCC down here on the coast, what happened is it was really after the wade-in and during the time when there was so many challenges around segregation, right? And around back then, Black Lives Matter, right? And so what happened is these individuals that were associated with the United Church of Christ, which was Back Bay Mission, and the churches that were UCC, if you were a member of those churches, chances were you lost your job as pushback to desegregation. You couldn't get hired anywhere, right? And so these churches eventually in the 74 closed their doors because they couldn't get employment. They couldn't be employed. And folks were kind of exiting stage right. And then what I found out, which was fascinating to me actually, was so 1963, the last wade-in, is at the board of directors meeting for Back Bay Mission. They met with the executive director and the staff that were a part of the wade-in. They didn't warn the board of directors ahead of time that they were going to be a part of this wade-in to desegregate the beach. And if there's any board members on now, I hope I don't ever, we'll see if I step over a line, right? Sometimes activism forces you to step over a line.
He's going to step over a line.
I'm going to step over a line, yeah. But you know, they had this really rich discussion and it was recorded. And actually, one of the previous associate executive directors gave me the notes and he said, I think these are the only notes we have for this meeting. And here's the thing. In those congregations, those 2 congregations that were UCC, they were taking votes to determine if they wanted to call a pastor who was a desegregationalist or a segregationalist. And the votes were split down the middle, partly because they were afraid, right? And partly because this was kind of this was the South, right? And this was the issue that was surfacing.
Mhm.
And so they had these challenges, right? Of what do we do and how do we move forward? And of course, they did call a desegregationalist pastor. And it from there, it became really difficult. That progressive presence here just wasn't welcome at that time. I think now it would be. We've had some discussions around a progressive presence here on the coast because there are some more progressive churches, Unitarian, Methodist, Episcopalian, that are more outspoken. But back then, that was a tough time. It was a tough time in the North, let alone the South, right?
Right,
But you were
right.
kind of in the cradle here.
Interesting. So here you are, and it's 2022, and you have this history behind you, but it's also your current emphasis. You know, um, this is not a history which is over. It is not a history that is ended. It's a history that's being lived out. And I'm wondering if, and of course, if you have Q&A, actually, I see a question in the Q&A. Oh yeah, this person was asking about the beach. Mr. Wright saying, can you talk about Back Bay Mission's participation in demonstrations to desegregate a public beach in Biloxi? The first one or two in 1961 turned violent. My brother George was a college student at the work camp in summer
Wow.
of '63 and joined the other UCC ministers at the camp in another demonstration. Several dozen were arrested, and the UCC Racial Justice Commission paid my brother's bail.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
If you
Thank
could
you.
send that part of the history to me, because I don't have
Yeah.
that written anywhere. That's beautiful.
That is amazing. That's Daniel Wright wrote that into the Q&A. Wow.
Thank you, Daniel.
This is why we get together. This is
This
so
gives me kind
powerful
of
and
Jesus
important.
bumps, right?
Yeah, right? Oh, so many stories. Sara, I'm wondering if you would like to share a little bit about, we have this remarkable history, but what are you seeing today? Who are the folks who are the Back Bay Mission community today? Because I know you're very tied to Biloxi, but I know in a given year, pre-pandemic, you would have more than 800 volunteers come in from all over the country. There's almost a diaspora community that comes in from Illinois and from Iowa, Indiana, all kinds of places. People gather in through the network of the UCC, through their congregational membership into Back Bay Mission. So you've got this community that comes in, and you've got a community that you're committed to, the Biloxi community. I'm wondering if you would share a few stories about what's happening today with your communities. She's got a really good one saved, doesn't she?
And this morning, Sara and I, she does, she's got a lot of them. Sara and I this morning, we met with 55 youth, high school youth, and their facilitators, which is probably another 10.
Yeah.
So 65, 70 individuals that are here doing work projects, work camp, right, from Illinois, 2 UCC churches in Illinois. So it was just, that's kind of where.
Oh, it was beautiful.
It was beautiful.
Yeah.
They were half asleep at 7:30 a.m., but it was beautiful.
Yeah.
So go ahead,
it was
Sara.
really interesting asking them, like, because we see so many homeless or people who come into homelessness, and they have especially with COVID now, we're seeing such an increase in people who have maybe never experienced homelessness before. So we're having this uprising of newly homeless women, children, a lot more women and children. And, you ask them that question, like, here's this backpack you take to school every day. What are you taking with you in your backpack? Because I think about it all. I literally think about this question all the time. If I had to pack one backpack to walk down the road with, what am I putting in my backpack? And I hope that they sat with that question and really leaned into it, because those are the decisions that these people make on a daily basis. Like, do I keep my important documents with me safe, secure, or do I trust them to lock them up in a cabinet for me? And so often they don't, and they take them with them. Backpacks aren't waterproof, tents aren't waterproof, and we get a lot of rain on the coast. So their things are just constantly ruined. And when you have no identification that says, this is who I am, and a society that doesn't recognize you as a human being, they just ride by you and act like the homeless don't exist and don't look at them. Just ignore them. They're not human. How horrible they must feel on a daily basis, just struggling to just find their own humanity every day. So we have a really interesting, the youth. I'm really excited about the youth because that's our future, and we got to get them to buy into the idea that there's bigger things out there than what's going on in their high schools and their daily
Cell
lives.
phones.
They have
And
their
their
cell
Twitters
phones
and tweets. And,
and TikTok and
TikTok.
everything else. Like there's, you see people doing this on TikTok, but you can be a part of this change in this culture. We do still see a lot of the same issues around the fishing industry. But there's also a lot of pride in those communities. By the time they come to Back Bay, they've exhausted every other avenue they possibly have. There's a lot of pride in those communities. We serve mostly males. I would say it's dominantly male. I think it changed this year though, from white males to African American males in the last year, which has been an interesting, because traditionally it's been mostly African American males or white males,
older males
that we see. We're still struggling a lot with elderly, like we talked about earlier. A lot of homeless seniors on the streets, which is devastating to think that somebody like my grandmother could be walking the streets because there's nowhere else for her to go, and they're on these limited incomes with Social Security. So, God, I have 100 stories I could talk about the type of people. So we have women who've come into the program that, something as easy as I don't have housing. There's such a fear and a stigmatism in getting help because you run the risk of losing your children to the state. And that's sort of what happened with this individual. She ended up homeless and lost her children to the state, had no high school diploma, never had a job, kind of came from poverty, which, we teach bridges out of poverty here. How do you get out of that cycle of poverty? So she lived her whole life like that. She had 2 children. The state took them. We worked really close with the state. We got her housed. We got her children back. We got her high school diploma. Actually, Kenny, who is our
director of services,
that is my supervisor. He has a big title. Sometimes that word seems so small, but his work is so big. I think his team needs a bigger title. Director of all programs.
He supervises half the staff.
He oversees half of us. He went to her high school graduation. She took the bridges out of poverty. She leaned into the work that we were doing, and in the end, we advocated for her to go to college. She has an associate's degree, a full-time job. She's moved out of the program. She's thriving. I see her all the time. My husband and I we mentor her children. She asked if we would be mentors for her kids because she still doesn't have a community outside of Back Bay Mission. So I think in the work that we do, we are their community. We're their advocates. We're their support. We wear a lot of hats, literally and figuratively. We wear a lot of hats here at Back Bay. So where she needed one thing, we have clients that just need us there to hold their hands and tell them that it's going to be okay. We have clients we sit with through cancer treatments that don't have any family. We have people we sit with while they pass away. It's an interesting group of people that come into the day center. We have people who were thriving members of society and had a traumatic brain injury, lost everything. We have people, Hurricane Katrina was devastating to the Gulf Coast, and we have a man who lost his wife and children and is an alcoholic. We have people with really serious stories that deserve somebody to listen to them and stand in that little gap and try to fight for them, because they have to find hope. And sometimes that's kind of what we do. We give hope to the hopeless. Yeah.
And we have 5 case managers that do that work with people that are homeless prevention or are homeless.
Mm-hmm.
Like Sara mentioned, the Micah Day Center, we serve about 500 people a year, if not more, right?
Mm-hmm.
Unduplicated. And they can access pretty much any services they need there to help them. Give them a hand up, not a hand out. But the challenge is that if you've been homeless for any length of time, you're going to develop a mental health issue, right? Because it's painful If you didn't have one before,
You have one now.
You have one now. And so there's a lot of barriers, a lot of challenges, even when we get people housed through our housing programs. It's hard for them to maintain the housing.
Very hard.
Or they kind of breathe a sigh of relief and they end up passing away within a year because they're finally in a place, in a space where they can do that, which is really shocking.
We met this man, and he had been coming to the Micah Day Center for quite a while. We had known him all through the pandemic, but you could tell he was gradually declining. But he was quiet and sort of slipped through the cracks, in that sometimes when you make a lot of noise, we get you housed quicker because you're in our face every day about, I need to be housed. Let's call open doors. This person really never did that. And we could kind of see him slowly disintegrating over time until the point he couldn't really walk anymore. So we took him to the hospital and dropped him off. Now he was sleeping on a dock. That dock has to be 300 feet long. You have to climb. It's a abandoned dock. You're not supposed to be out there. There's like a gate. So you have to climb up over the gate. It's missing rafters. And he was laying out there because he couldn't really walk. He was 114 pounds at the time. We take him to the hospital. He's diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and cancer of the fat that sits above your organs, which is always terminal, they said. So they basically send him out the doors with a letter to go to a doctor, which he has no insurance. He has no income. They wouldn't even see him because of that. And I mean, that's where we were like, this is a call to action. Like, we're not going to accept the no. We're going to find a new solution. So we put a post out on Facebook, which can be used for good. And and it's interesting, the community response. They donated. People got together $1,000 for this man. We got him into a hotel room until we could get his housing ready. He gets in my program. We start and then weirdly, this lady I got connected with at the hospital, she's like, we see indigent people with no income if they have cancer. And I'm like, wow. And she says, I'm going to go talk to the doctor. I'm going to get him in. And she did. And we got him in, and it wasn't good news. It's really hard to sit with somebody who had no children, no wife. His family had all passed. He was alone in this world. And it's a weird place to be someone, but then you don't always know what to say sometimes when you're sitting in there and they're basically telling you that you're going to die. So from the time he entered my program, he had passed within a month. And that whole month was fighting for somebody to give this man just a little bit of dignity, just that much dignity. And it was very frustrating because he ended up with COVID at the end and had to be taken to the hospital. It took 5 hours for an EMT to get there. And I kept saying, this man, you know, he is dying. He is puking in buckets and dying on his couch. And they just wouldn't come. And then they were very rude to this man. They take him to the hospital. They told me I could not come because of the COVID regulations. And so we, call every day, checking on, and they said he was going to pass away there. He was not coming home. And I said, well, okay. And so we kept calling. And a week later they called and said, he's coming home today. And I said, no, he cannot take care of himself. I mean, we were out there on the weekends feeding him, bringing him smoothies because he couldn't keep food down. And it was very sad. They sent him home anyways after they said some very unkind things about this man. They sent him home on a Saturday. Because of the COVID, it had to be a 10-day quarantine. We couldn't see him till Tuesday. We go knock on his door, doesn't answer. Nobody's heard from him. He didn't have a cell phone. We knock on the door again, doesn't answer. We went and got maintenance to come open the door for us because the apartments are in Back Bay Mission's name. They stay in them as a sub-occupant. And he had passed away on his couch the same day they brought him home from the hospital. And he did not want to die in a hospital. So part of me has a lot of relief in that he was where he wanted to be. He had cut little paper crosses out and put them up on the wall. We prayed with him a lot, sat with him on the weekends. He was just a kind man, and he deserved dignity to die. He deserved more dignity than he got, but he did get an apology. I issued a complaint to the hospital, and this is probably the only time this man has ever been apologized to, but he had passed away before he got it. And I mean, we get a lot of that. We get a lot of people who are so sick, and by the time you house them, there's such little time. People with serious illnesses are living on the streets every day.
And part of, I mean, I think there's always God moments in this work that we do, although this can be really exhausting work. But one of the God moments, at least for me, was a friend of mine, Yvonne Harrison, happened to be here, who was a member of my congregation, happened to be here
She's the best.
visiting. She wanted to go out with Sara to do some outreach, right? I think in the woods and various places. And they were the ones that came upon this particular individual who had died in his apartment, right? So Yvonne, who's in the healthcare industry, got to be there with Sara, but also kind of got to help you process that, and you helped her process it.
Yeah.
And then, of course, I had to show up and be the pastor, right?
Yeah.
And say, is everything okay? And you could tell that this was a kind of a spirit moment together.
It was, God needed her to be there with me, because you develop relationships with these people over time. And I truly, when I say I love people, I don't say that lightly. I want the best for them. And when you're the one driving them to their cancer appointments, and like when the doors close at 4:00, our job doesn't end. Like, that sign, the mission starts outside of the doors. So there is no off time. If somebody needs my help, I want to be there for them. And he's been around my kids. I've picked him up from the hospital on the weekend so we didn't have to walk. So you develop these relationships with these people. And I remember when I walked in there, I think that's her right there, isn't it, Yvonne?
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Yvonne's on here. And I remember opening the door and I thought, I cannot breathe. Like, I did not want that as the outcome. And she was so kind. She got me a chair. Like, I don't know what I would have done without her, honestly. It was, and I felt so terrible, because every time people go out with me, I've been rear-ended. We've been in accidents.
Volunteers.
Yeah. I'm like, are y'all sure you want to come
She's a
with
little
me?
tragic behind the wheel. I'm just saying. Yeah.
A tragic driver. And, but like we had another client who I had known for years. We actually housed him to die. If you had seen this man, he was at the end. He ended up getting into treatment. He became clean and sober. He had actually come out with me in the woods and talked to other homeless people. He was such a gift. He would come. He said he wanted to pay it back. And he spent his time with me doing that. We had such a close relationship. We used to sing Meatloaf off key, and he used to say all the time, nothing's going to kill me but your driving. And so I'll never, we were riding in my car to an open doors meeting, because he liked to come and represent the homeless community, because we really try not to assume their needs, but ask them, what do you need? Yeah, we make a lot of assumptions. And I remember we were riding back and he said, Sara, my tongue hurts. And he's like, it's, I've been on this herpes medication for 8 months. And I said, well, let me look at it. And he said, he showed me his tongue, and it had literally turned white and was eating away his tongue. And he said, I can't eat. And I said, oh goodness, you could look at it and tell he had immediately I'm like, that's cancer. I don't know who diagnosed you with, herpes for 8 months. You've been misdiagnosed. And, you take him to the doctors, and you sit with them, and this man had no family, and you sit with them and they're like, we're going to cut your tongue out, and we're going to graft pieces out of your legs, and then we're going to cut you like ear to ear and pull out all your lymph nodes. And like, you're just sitting there thinking, what am I going to be for this man? And wow. It was so tragic. And we would sit with him. Oh, it was he's hard for me to talk about. And, I don't want to cry.
Well, and the challenge kind of across the country, as you all know, because you're all living in different locations, is that healthcare is generally for those who have the resources, right? It is for those who have insurance, and for people without insurance that are homeless. It's so important to have an advocate, right? And somebody to walk alongside and journey with them. And that's part of what all of our case managers really do here at Back Bay. Yeah. Even if it's helping somebody with their energy assistance or whatnot, right? So I think, and at the Micah Day Center, that's the day center where people who are homeless can find some compassion and love and a shower and get their clothing washed, get a snack, and just get on the computer to find jobs, charge their cell phone, do what they need to do. Elena, were you going to ask a question?
Well, I was going to say, bringing up the UCC identity piece, there's this saying, an old saying in the UCC, that to believe is to care, and to care is to do. And what I experienced, I brought my youth group 15 years ago to Back Bay Mission, was that it was the opposite. We went there to do, and it taught us to care. And then it led us to ask questions about belief. I mean, you can't sit with somebody who is knocking on heaven's door and not pause and think about that which is greater than us. It causes us, it puts us on a spiritual journey to put ourselves in a place of service. And I always say you don't lose yourself when you serve others, you find yourself. And I think that's what happens when volunteers come to Back Bay. And it certainly sounds like it happens for the staff. So here's a question. We are in times of great political division, and the
No.
stories. I know, right? It's a
Oh.
newsflash. Newsflash, not unlike the stories from the 60s you were sharing. But
Exactly.
what happens at Back Bay Mission, which has an incredibly diverse staff? You're a UCC organization that employs people from different racial, ethnic, religious, political, educational, life story, background. You have different hobbies. I mean, you're a very diverse collection of folks. And you are doing the kind of work where you put your heart into it and all of a sudden you trip and you fall and you're in politics, right?
Yeah.
So what is the thing that happens that makes it possible for such a diverse group, again, including political diversity down there on the Gulf Coast? What is it about the spirit of Back Bay Mission that brings people together, even when they have profoundly different political worldviews, and you're doing the kind of work that gets you talking about religion and politics?
Not easy. It's a balance, right? And I have to say, from my personal experience having stepped in here from being a pastor in a church in Phoenix that was kind of the center of justice in the center of the city, we were doing some really amazing work to walk into, and kind of my UCC peeps in the pews. I mean, they were pretty all progressive, right? And to come here and work with a staff that is very diverse, it's really given me a wake-up call. It's taught me how to have those conversations and to love through the differences, right? It's loving through the difference. And even though I may be diametrically opposed in some issues with some of my staff, I embrace them, I love them for who they are and where they're at on this journey, right? That's what we do as UCC folks. But we also have this really incredibly deep diversity of somebody from South Africa, somebody from the islands, somebody from Germany. We have somebody who identifies as Vietnamese, somebody who identifies as Korean. I identify as a queer male, right? And not everybody on staff really thinks it's okay to be gay, right? And so we have to have those tough discussions and tough discussions about, and I got here and I understood that the staff were pretty divided through the elections and then through Black Lives Matter and some of the challenges and the stories that go along with that and the narrative, right? And so I just kind of walked in for this first year and said, hey, I'm going to celebrate this diversity and I'm going to love these people. And we're going to love each other because it's really about the mission and it's about strengthening the neighborhoods. It's about, doing justice and being aware of the justice that needs to happen. And really advocating for the people that are most in the margins. And so if we focus on our core values and we focus on what's really important and we don't let our differences distract us from that, which is really, really hard work, we're in a good place. And have we made it there yet? No. And I've been thinking about, so we're going to be coming into another challenging time, midterms and another election. And what do we do? And how do we live together, be together in a way that's healthy, that we have healthy dialogue even amidst our differences? So to me, I feel like I've learned a lot. I know Sarah's learning a lot. She's going through this leadership program, this master's in leadership, which is probably challenging her. And every so often I'll say to Sarah, so Sarah, when you're in this big leadership role, X, Y, and Z, right?
Yeah.
You're going to have these differences. You're going to have these challenges. You're going to have people that believe completely different, have different values. And yet we need to focus on what's really important. So I'm not sure I answered that question.
Yeah.
Sarah, what would you add?
Well, I think educating, I think taking the time to educate ourselves and educate others, because that's essentially what we do every day anyways, is try to educate people. we're doing emotional intelligence training.
Yeah.
Love emotional intelligence. I'm so excited about this. So we actually just started this as staff development, and I think we're going to continue to carry it on because, we actually talk about this stuff all the time. But I think what's important is that we're not telling you need to be different. We're not telling you not to have your beliefs. We just want everybody to leave room for everybody to be who they are. And so that's a really hard challenge for some. It's funny because James always tells me I'm very UCC. I'm probably more UCC than I think I am.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I'm not
That is a
denominational.
thing.
I'm a follower of Christ, so I don't really, but I have grown up a Southern Baptist. And when you sit in those pews and you listen to them talk about God is love, God is love, God is love, but not if you're in this box or not if you're in that box.
Mm-hmm.
And I just don't think that's what Christ would want. I just feel like, when everybody went around the prostitute, he went right to her. And I just feel like our job is to love people wherever they at. And through that love and them feeling accepted, hopefully it opens dialogue and trust to have those kind of conversations. And I would say a lot of us are capable of having those conversations now. The politics was rough. The COVID
was rough. Masking, not masking.
The vaxxers and the non-vaxxers.
Yeah.
But again, it's like just understanding that you don't do the Spirit's work, right? It's not my job. It's not my role and responsibility to change who you are or to change your mind about anything. I can educate you. I can tell you a point of view. But at the end of the day, we all have free will to be who we want to be. And they deserve to be loved for who they are as much as I want to be loved for who I am. And not be apologetic for who I am. So we do have an interestingly diverse staff.
Strangely diverse.
But we have like a book club and we talk about, like if we don't understand the gender pronouns, and we didn't, and we have somebody who is in a transgendered relationship.
Yeah, and identifies as them and they for their pronouns, which brought up an interesting discussion.
Yeah, so we, it's one of those things like you're like, ooh, I want to ask, but I don't know how they're going to receive my question. I want to make sure, we're so afraid sometimes to start the conversation because we can't control the outcome that we don't do it. We don't do the hard stuff. So
yeah, I want to control the outcome.
I want to control the outcome. So, I'm very direct. I would say I'm a pretty direct person.
Pretty much.
Yeah, no. So I just went up and asked, like, I need you to explain this, because in my brain, it's not that I don't appreciate that this is how you identify. It's not that I don't agree with what you're doing. Grammatically, I can't understand the terminology. I need you to explain it to me and then educate me. And then remembering that it's not their job to educate me. So if I really want an answer, I should go look it up myself. So that's kind of what we've been doing. And we were like, we're a group of people here at this table and we don't understand it. So we all got a bunch of information. We talk about it, and anybody's is allowed to come and sit with it and have these every time we talk about something different, racial equity, gender pronouns. We've talked about we're off topic all the time though. We just kind of do this. And that's how it came up, because we were talking about racial equity. We were talking about the in-betweens. The people in between. Yeah. And we're like, well, this is something that we've been curious about. And, we recognize some of the staff doesn't want to learn about it. So we don't force it on them. We just educate ourselves and hope through conversations that we can shine a light in all those little dark crevices of the world. But yeah.
But we do. I mean, the challenge is requiring, right, so to speak, everybody be on with the mission. To be on with everybody's welcome, to be on with that extravagant welcome that we're so UCC, right, about. And that happens. But I think it's that underlying, how do I understand this in my worldview? How does this fit with my worldview and my culture? And especially I had some awarenesses, right, as a queer man, not realizing that maybe not everybody knew initially I was a gay man or I was queer. And then it's really fascinating to be able to unpack that for yourself and step back and say, in every situation we're in, every place we're in, we have opportunities to learn, to grow, to change, to be transformed. And so for me, it's been incredibly transformative. And I think it's becoming very transformative for the staff here, because we're learning more, we're going deeper, right, with each other. And we need to do that, because that's the real world in which we live.
And because no matter who you are or where you are on life's journey, you are welcome at Back Bay Mission.
Literally all walks of life. We get everybody from registered sex offenders, 4-time felons, to little old ladies that you don't, I mean, we
Yeah, but
literally,
those are the ones you really got to watch out for,
That's
Sarah.
right.
The little
Yes.
old church ladies of the
Little church
UCC get
ladies.
things
Yes.
done.
With permed gray hair.
Yes.
That's it.
That's
Yeah.
right. That's right. Well, we are on the home stretch, and there are a
Oh,
couple
really?
questions in the
Oh.
chat. Yeah. But also, I wanted to make sure that you got to invite us. We've got more than 50 people, amazing turnout here on the recording. We know more people will watch it later. How can we find out more about the Centennial, and how can we be part of it, even if we're not in Biloxi?
So you can go on our website, and soon our website specific to the Centennial, our 100-year anniversary, will be happening. Reverend Dr. John Dorhauer is going to be coming down the first weekend in October. It's going to be a big event here. We invite you to that. All sorts of stuff, learning opportunities, fun opportunities, celebrations. Hopefully it might be the start to our UCC community here, worshiping community. We'll see, but no promises. But you can go on our website and check things out. And especially I would invite you all, if there's 50 people, you all come down to spend some time here to volunteer. I am telling you, the one thing that's been beautiful, now I haven't seen as many volunteers because I was here during the midst of COVID. It's starting to open up.
Mhm.
With these volunteers that come down, they are transformed and they are changed. And it doesn't take much, right? Because they're out there. We have loaves and fishes in our parking lot. They're feeding 110 people a day, maybe more. And they're interacting, they're connecting. Our volunteers are on the work site. Like, volunteering here is pretty amazing.
Mhm.
And then in the evenings to be together for a shrimp boil or for dialogue around what happened today. How can I make sense of this? How does this challenge my faith and my relationship to the divine? How does this challenge my worldview? All of that. We invite you to come down, spend time on the coast. We do have some beautiful beaches, although the people that live here don't like the beaches. I love the beach.
I'm a Floridian.
She's a Floridian. Our beaches are not sparkling blue. Our sand is white.
Mhm.
But we have a beautiful culture and a rich culture. And so I just extend that invitation.
Mhm.
And as we turn 100 years, we've got all sorts of things that are going to be coming down the pike this year. So stay tuned. Our first kickoff down here on the coast is a breakfast. It's going to be at a breakfast spot where we're inviting about 75 individuals that are kind of influencers on the coast to participate and be a part of that. And we'll be having some events across the country. So stay tuned.
Fantastic. So there'll be events in Biloxi, but it also sounds like you're supporting communities, the UCC congregations who are part of your network. They're also going to be hosting events.
Yep.
Oh,
I'm
that's
going
really
up
neat.
I'm going up to Tennessee. I believe Mary Ruth is on today, and I'll be going up to Tennessee to participate, to preach, to do a shrimp boil. So yeah, so lots of stuff happening. We've got some folks, a team of people that are planning events, in Illinois and Connecticut and Wisconsin, if I miss your state, in Ohio, where a lot of our folks and volunteers come from.
But isn't it
That's
going to be
fantastic.
interesting in another 100 years? What are they going to say about what we did?
Oh my gosh, right?
We have to do something spectacular. We have to make change that people want to talk about in 100 years.
We have to do something huge. Is that what you're
Yeah.
saying?
Yeah, it's like we sat here
Bigger
with all
than
this.
life.
We had sat here with all this history,
Yep.
and then you're in 100 years when people sit down to talk about the last 100 years. What are they going to say about
Right.
us? Like, we're going to be part of the history.
Yep.
James and Sarah, I think you are already doing something remarkable that will be remembered, and I am so grateful. First of all, a big thank you to Becca and Brandy for administering today, and thank you to all of our participants. To those of you who are watching this after the fact, thank you for checking it out. And a huge appreciation to Sarah and James. We're going to send you some UCC swag to thank you for your
Yay.
time. Yes. And of course, a heartfelt congratulations to Back Bay Mission on its centennial. And James, Reverend Pennington, I'm wondering if you would be willing to give us a blessing, as I am so grateful that we had this time to share stories and think about all the gifts that the last 100 years have given. Would you be willing to say a little blessing for us?
I would love to. You ready?
Yep.
Okay, so I would suggest that you put your feet flat on the floor to kind of center yourself on this earth that we've been given, this land that was indigenous, that now we walk and tread upon lightly. Put your hands up on your knees or in your lap, ready to receive the energy of spirit that calls us to be hands and feet where we are at. So let us pray. O Spirit of life and breath, we are so incredibly grateful for this opportunity to be together in Zoom. Who knew that this would be such a gift to share information, to share your goodness, to share your love and your justice and your compassion. I am thankful for each individual that joined us today. Ignite the fire of passion, the fire of justice in their hearts and their souls and their spirits, that they can be a light to someone today, to someone holding a sign on the street corner that says, I need money, I need food, that they can look in their eyes, wave, smile, and acknowledge a fellow traveler, a fellow human divine being. Let us share love. Let us share love with those who are most in need. And let us just be to each other what you've called us to be. We ask your blessing upon the 100th anniversary of this amazing organization. And Sara and I and the rest of the staff are so incredibly grateful for the shoulders upon which we stand. I am so grateful for Elena in my life, that she was there for me in Minneapolis at a restart, new start, church that we pulled two communities together in ways that were really life-giving and powerful. I thank you for each other and for the ways that we can be your hands and feet, that we can be Jesus, that we can be God with a face to one another. Bless us today. Bless us each and every day, not just that we're blessed, but that so we can be a blessing to those around us. Thank you for those who are here supporting us. Technology, we are grateful for them and for their presence. We ask these things in your many multitude of names that you have given us on this earth to these many and diverse people. Amen.
Amen. Oh, well, that's the end of our hour. I invite everybody to come back next week. We're going to be celebrating National Volunteer Month with some wonderful stories and some tips and tricks to support volunteerism in your local church. And come back for Wednesdays on the World. It's something different. Or is it 2 weeks from now, Becca, or is it 1 week? It's next week, right? Yep, 1 week from now. Come on back, see Wednesdays on the World, and thank you, all of you who support the United Church of Christ through your generous love, your donations, and the way you bring our mission of love and justice alive in your local setting. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a blessed Wednesday.
Peace.
Siblings in Christ, if this conversation has moved you, if what's been offered here has helped enhance your ministry or your soul, please consider donating towards the annual fund of the United Church of Christ by texting UCC to 41444. Your support will help programs like this in the essential work of the United Church of Christ. Thank you for your support. Be blessed as you continue your day. Know that you are not alone, and we are holding you in prayer.